yeah, Konrad contributed one of the sky cultures to Stellarium, which is the Locono sky culture in the north of the so-called South America. What is Venezuela, roughly?
I'll talk about Suriname, Guyana. Yeah.
And this is a very, very accurately documented sky culture. And well, during some discussions this September or so, August maybe, we decided to include this presentation here into this row of presentation of various sky cultures. So thank you for coming here and giving that presentation.
Thank you.
And status quo.
Thank you. So I'm speaking here on behalf of several people who are part of the larger team. I'm Konrad Rybka. I work at Jena University. I'm a postdoc in linguistics. I've been working in South America, in Guyana, Suriname, French Guyana. This is north, just above Brazil, little countries, for about 20 years. I started working first with the Locono people on the coast of these countries, and today this project also involves Martin Percy from Suriname and Father Jones from Guyana. These are our two Locono experts on this specific topic. I will talk about Locono people more in a minute. Leandra Germani, she is also a Locono person. She's an artist, but she lives in the diaspora in the Netherlands, Suriname, ex-colony of the Netherlands, Guyana, Britain. Ilya Khalid, an affiliated researcher here in Germany, also helps us a bit with programming, coding, whatever you call it. I don't even have words for that. Hey. So the point of my talk today is really to introduce you a little bit to my field, which is language documentation, partly because I feel that there is a lot for Stellarium to gain from us language documenters and vice versa. So I'll tell you a little bit about language documentation and then how that would work for astronomical knowledge and why Stellarium is, I think, so great for us. And this presentation is a little bit choppy. I haven't over-prepared for this. I was kind of more trying to fill the room and what's in your hands. And I'm really happy to hear that there were a lot of moments today where linguistics was kind of the key element. Things like, things I've heard like, oh, how do we know this is a hard G, but we're not sure how to pronounce this word yet. How was the name of this constellation pronounced in the 1900s? Where do we put the oral traditions about these constellations? So the actual oral stories that people produce. How do we solve the translation issues and the spelling issues? All those questions are questions for a linguist, but I would say even more so for language documenters specifically. So what is language documentation? I thought I'm going to look up this on Wikipedia because you're not language documenters. I'm really surprised there are linguists in the room, which is great. I marked and read what I think is actually not language documentation, and I'm going to read it to position it for you. So language documentation is a subfield of linguistics, which aims to provide a comprehensive record of the linguistic practices characteristic of the human speech community. I'll explain all that. Language documentation seeks to create a thorough record, or as far a record as possible of the speech community for both posterity and language revitalization. This record can be public or must be public, depending on the needs of the community. I would say it has to be public, but there can be different access levels. In practice, language documentation can range from solo linguistic anthropological fieldwork to the creation of vast online archives. I would say this is actually the core of it, that contain dozens of different languages. Not that. Language documentation provides a firmer foundation for linguistic analysis. Really, this is the basic of empiricism in linguistics. Linguistics, otherwise not empirical science. It creates a corpus of materials in that language. These materials can then support claims of the structure of language. Yes. So that's the basis for empiricism in linguistics, and then you can use this primary data to do all kinds of analysis. So let's just systematize a little bit. So a record of the linguistic practices of the speech community. This is kind of the core of all language documentation. By record, we mean actual audio-visual primary data. So recordings of people actually speaking, not what you have heard and written down on paper. That's already analysis. You already made analytical decisions about what sounds, which sounds in this language are meaningful, how to transcribe them, and so on. That's already analysis. The primary data is really the person actually saying words, sentences, well, using sentences, but more naturalistic speech. Begin with. So it's also a departure from the kind of elicitation model when linguists would come to the community and ask, so how do you say brother? How do you say your sister? And so on. It's more about naturalistic speech, how people actually speak, rather than putting them in kind of an experimental setup. Big emphasis on metadata also, because we want to know who said it, when they said it, gender, age, all those kind of factors that affect variation in language. Again, I'll stress this is the empirical basis of linguistics, which basically means that linguistics became empirical quite recently. And a lot of people who, well, write grammars without providing us with those recordings that we can check and replicate and reanalyze the data, kind of not like this statement, but language documentation is kind of very accepted. Multimedia, there's a big emphasis here on multimedia. So we're recording the sound because that's the basis of language, but there's much more to it. There's gesture, there's the setting. So we typically use audio video documentation. It plays a role, of course, also, but it's secondary. And depending on the project, other things to be documented can come in play, like location, if you're, for instance, working on the linguistic encoding of landscape, which was my PhD thesis. Definitely inspired by the sensory turn in general in the sciences, so to move away from the textual bias of the sciences towards a fuller description of what's happening when people talk. There's a big focus on knowledge here, not so much, I would say language documentation is a lot about documenting knowledge through language. And here is really where astronomy, for instance, contemplates, that's part of people's knowledge. This also means that language documentation is almost by definition interdisciplinary. We work with different fields. We'll come to it in a minute. It is by design also a very fieldwork, of course, focused part of linguistics, and it is going in a very collaborative direction to the degree that ideally we want simply to train people to document themselves or to document their languages themselves, which thinking about Stellarium is also great because it is kind of a tool that is easy to learn in principle. Comprehensive documentation is, well, trying to document as much of the language as possible. That's kind of usually never possible. So a typical project is more domain focused. It's focused on, let's say, vocabulary of or the language of plants. So there would be a collaboration with botany for astronomy in this case. That data that we create, the presumption is that they have many purposes. We're not creating them just for research purposes, and definitely not only for linguistic research. The idea is that we archive these data and that they can be useful to astronomers, anthropologists, botanists, linguists, the community itself for visualization purposes. We can't, the presumption is that we can't predict what this data will be useful for in the future, in principle, but here, that's why the archival element of it is very crucial. Definitely, the whole discipline started a lot with the discourse on endangered languages, and the focus of language documentation is on those languages that are most endangered. That's also where the funding is. Many of them, if not all, are oral cultures, and that's kind of really important because what I'm talking about today when it comes to Stellarium is really sound. I want sound in Stellarium. Publicly accessible archives is also one of the kind of things on the checklist of language documentation. If it's not public, it's not language documentation. We're not interested that you went there and you have recordings at home. That's good. But as long as you're not having an archive, it's not language documentation. Publicly accessible with a pinch of salt. Of course, we understand there's things people can say on camera that are culturally sensitive or otherwise, and so you can filter that out. You might not want to archive it at all. That kind of discourse for different types of access levels in archives. And well, so Wikipedia, forget about it. This is better references here if you're interested. Archives. Again, cornerstone of this field, there are many of them. This is Texas, Berkeley, Sydney. This is Nijmegen, the MPI. In Nijmegen, this is the Indian Languages Archive now in Berlin. So you have these institutions around the corner. I think the MPI in Leipzig is also historically at least very involved in language documentation. I want to just show you how a typical file looks like. So this is a bit of a crazy project where it was COVID and we couldn't go to the field. So instead of that, we sent people money. We asked them to buy smartphones, and the whole project was developed via WhatsApp. And this is the community recording. Well, one of the members of the community. This is Taruma speaker, Irene Lewis from Guyana, and she's just introducing herself as part of the project. I will play a bit of it, but I just want you to see how our data is basically structured. So there's a recording that is time aligned, and there is a transcription. So this is where we do the analysis. The primary data is just the file. We have a transcription in Taruma that is divided into words. There's morphemic divisions. Then there is glossing, English translation, and so on. You could add as many fields as you want if you want to code it differently. Let's see the sound. I'm showing you this because this is from this kind of files where we have a person speaking about, we'll hear later a person speaking about constellations. It is from these files that we can export, let's say, as like a subtitle file, from which we can have, you know, time-aligned text in Taruma and say in English. And this is what we're going to see later in Stellarium in a minute. Now, I said earlier that language documentation is a lot about collaboration, and this is just to show you an inside of 1 hour kind of field work, Bibles, and there is a chapter about astronomy, so it is something that is not necessarily totally foreign to linguists, but it is not yet, I haven't seen a language documentation project, let me put it like this, that is focused on astronomical knowledge alone. I think that's possible. There are good reasons for us linguists to be interested in it. From a language endangerment perspective, very endangered kind of domain of knowledge. Sure, as language is lost, vocabulary is lost in general, but there is specifically for astronomical knowledge, there's additional things like land loss, climate change, which makes kind of knowledge fall out of sync, or can make this kind of knowledge fall out of sync. And be forgotten even faster, technology, which limits exposure to the dark skies, both in terms of people have other forms of sociality at night, like TV, but also simply because there is more light. Formal education, of course, that introduces new foreign concepts, astronomical concepts, and so on. For us, linguists, so on the endangerment side, very strong, and that is kind of one of the focus of language documentation. The more endangered, the more chances to be funding to document it. Culturally salient, obviously, I don't have to explain it to you. Astronomy is mired in all kinds of different practices, belief systems, arts, crafts, timekeeping, and so on. So a very culturally salient part of culture. Some call it an aspect of environmental adaptation, kind of a unique insight into human cultures. It's locally anchored. I find it also very interesting. So that speaks to cultural diversity that we can observe in this kind of vocabulary across cultures, but also very prone to borrowing, I would expect. Partly because of its cultural significance. And we see that in Guyana for sure, where a lot of constellations are shared across unrelated languages. Now, there are for us linguists, there are several major obstacles to documenting constellations. The first, of course, we don't know nothing about astronomy. It's one. I didn't even put it here. Field work is, of course, always limited. We're rarely there for the whole year. To document everything. Now I work in the tropics weather conditions. Moon phase, the dark skies, you know all that. What is another problem for us is what I would call here the nature of astronomical knowledge, and I'll explain that in a minute in detail. And also the textual bias of generally of the sciences, like how do you report in something that is constantly moving, that does not really exist in a way outside a human mind. Now, Stellarium, I think, is a great tool for overcoming some of these obstacles, both when it comes to documenting the actual knowledge and sharing it later. Because that's, I haven't maybe emphasized that enough, but that sharing part is really important to us as well. We're not documenting it for ourselves, we're documenting it so that we can share it also back with the community. And in our case, this community is spread, so we have the diaspora in the Netherlands and people in Jena. It is a free, open, learning software, which makes it publicly accessible in principle. People can easily download it, we can use it. I find it quite easy to use, so I think it is a nice tool for collaboration. I think people can easily use it. By the way, when I'm talking about Stellarium, I am thinking both about desktop and the app. When I say it's easy, I'm thinking the app. And this is what we use in the field mostly. The app, it has a huge user base, academic embedding with platforms, which also is in line with our focus on dissemination and multi-purpose goals of collecting it in the first place. It has an archivable format, I mean, at least the background files, which is kind of critical to us in language documentation. But again, I like to say that if they are actually archived somewhere, which I guess they are archived because they are on GitHub, so they are somewhere in a bunker in Norway. But maybe there's other ways to think about it, where to archive it also more accessibly. Simulation of naturalistic view of the sky, this is great, and I'll come to that, how we benefit from that when we collect and visualize the data as amateur astronomers, linguists. And multimedia, this is, of course, we have text in Stellarium, of course, we have images in Stellarium, we already know that, and I want to show you today that we also have sound in Stellarium. I'd like to see video and slide one day too. Cultures, what I also find very great about the potential of it is that in principle, cultures could talk to one another without this intermediary major languages. So our Locono Stellarium sky culture is now translated, for instance, into Bengali. And I find it's really great that these two cultures can kind of talk to one another directly without the intermediary major language, but also with much less jargon. And I'll come to this right now, which I find also, I think of it as part of more general decolonizing efforts. Before I'm going to tell you how we actually use it, let me just come back to the Locono people briefly. The Locono people live in French Guyana, Suriname, and Guyana, who live in Venezuela too. Locono means the people. That's the autonym. Arawak is the exonym on clear meaning. It's an Arawakan language, so plenty of Arawakan languages over the continent, biggest language family on the continent. About 10,000 people living in 10,000 Locono people living in this country. Probably is less than % and really grandfather or great grandfather generation only that speak the language. And then there's diaspora in the Netherlands. That's so other ex well, France is still the colonizer there. This is a zoom in here. Now, our work here with this local Stellarium is a combination of both historical sources from the early 20th century and fieldwork today. So because part of this knowledge is already lost. So in the historical sources, we see there was much more than people still remember today. There's nothing new, maybe also let me put it like that, compared to the historical sources, it's only diminishing. These sources that you can see here, these are all actually, this is a dictionary written by a local man. So this is really coming from the community. It's the first dictionary written by a local man. These two sources are also kind of appropriated by these two Dutch authors. This book was co-written by a local man, this one as well, and they have quite some information about constellations. So let's just jump right into it briefly. The local constellations usually contain a name of an animal or a plant, followed by this word kuya. And what this kuya means, the pen dictionary tells us kuya means the spirit, a material being, which is the guiding principle of each animal or fish. And this Kuya terms both refer to those spirits, but also to the constellations. So each Kuya is the spirit of the black itself, which is like a bird, and it's the actual spirit of this animal, but also the constellation that is like the image of the spirit in the sky. And Fuji, which is the Locono co-author of these other two sources, adds that there used to be the oral tradition about each of these constellations. Most of them are today lost. These are some examples of the Kuya constellations. You can see there's all of them refer to, mostly refer to animals, some of them to plants. They're all related to seasonal subsistence practices. So Awara Kuya, for instance, comes up when the fruits of the Awara farm are ripe. So people know this is the season for the Awara palm fruits. Then after the Awara palm fruits, there used to be the Haduri Kuya, which is the constellation of the Aguti that comes when the fruits have already fallen. So the Agutis come to eat those fruits under the trees. After the Haduri, there used to be a constellation of the tiger, which then follows the Agutis to those living forests. So it is a whole calendar of events in nature related also to kind of specific landscape features. Yes. Now, I want to come back to this issue that I said, nature of the domain and the text bias. Now, the constellation here, a definition from Britannica, is any of the certain groupings of stars that were imagined, at least by those who named them, to form conspicuous configurations of objects or creatures in the sky. And this definition is, in principle, perfect, culturally neutral. But the reality of it is that Western constellations came to function as synonyms of the term, and their boundaries, as we've heard today, also they are used by astronomers to assign every star somewhere. And in humanities, these Western stars have also become the ethical grid to describe the constellations of other people. So I'll show you some examples, and of course that's problematic because you know very well, this is Locono constellations mapped onto Western ones. There is no overlap necessarily. Some things are bright enough so that everybody sees it, but some constellations do not map it well on our patterns, or map it to different patterns. And so now, when I said, these are examples of how these Western constellations have been used in the Locono case to report Locono constellations. So Kamodo Kuya, for instance, the third of the Anaconda is according to the Kuya, and Karofuji, part of Scorpio, and I don't even know how to pronounce it. So this is useless for our now purposes. If we want to add it to Stellarium, we don't know which part. I don't even know what that is. The 13th, right? It's less known. Anora Kuya, well, this is an example when there is actually overlap. So Anora Kuya is the spirit of the Koikaron. He would say, he said that it's Ursa Meyer. He really meant Big Dipper, but I think this we can forget. The problem is that even when we know that Ursa Meyer is the Anora Kuya, that still doesn't tell me how that bird, which is a heron here, maps onto that shape. And that turns out to be culturally relevant because it's only when the beak points down that the people say diseases will come with big wings. So here's where also artwork of Stellarium really plays an important role for me. Another way of reporting stars that we've seen in the Guyanas, this is Mr. Bayer mentioned earlier. So using this code, alpha beta for the brightest stars. I mean, this is literally Greek to me, but also to the indigenous people. So it's hard to read. By the way, we tried to recreate it. It not always worked. From the colonial perspective, I think this is really too much. We can't expect, the indigenous people to learn a new language, to learn their own stuff back. Another thing that he has in his book, which is great, these are drawings by the village chief and his son of the constellation. Sorry, I didn't mention, but this is not Locono, this is Wayana, another indigenous nation of the area. So he has these drawings, which I think is great. They also point to me quite some difference, and I see that in the field as well, that people don't use line drawings, they just dot it. I noticed that on your slides as well. I don't know if it's a pattern, that they just use dots and not lines. But again, this picture in the book still does not really tell us how to, how it looks on the sky. What Stellarium gives us is HIP codes, which we can use. So in the field, I come with an iPad, we look at the sky, and we identify the HIP codes of which objects form which pattern. We then put it into Stellarium files, and the beautiful result you'll see in a minute. The point is that neither me nor the indigenous people have to know anything about HIP codes. The users simply see the constellations on their phones or on the computer just as they would on the sky. So this is how we use Stellarium to first of all document it, and for this we use especially the first of all the up version, because we can use it nicely on an iPad and just point it at the sky at night. We also use the desktop version for documentation when we want to observe constellations at different times of the year. We simulate, another month. And it has worked with for some people, it might be difficult to get used to this new type of projection of the sky on the computer screen, but we had quite some success also with that. So this helped us to overcome some of those fieldwork limitations. And then, of course, that's when it comes to later, after collecting data, Stellarium is also great to visualize those things. And of course, we can have text, indeed unlimited text, and I'll show you in a minute how ours works. Leander makes these beautiful artworks for these constellations. She uses color to highlight kind of the key element of the event in nature. And I want to show you now a little bit of the of her work, but I'm going to show it to you in a so Stellarium, one thing that we've done is the sky culture itself, which I know you're all familiar how it works. So adding constellations, adding images, and so on. But now we're exploring scripts because this is where we see language being a possible addition, the oral side of it. So we've made a script, and we've made several scripts with language. What we've done here is this is Father Jones speaking in a second. So the script takes you from one constellation to another. It gives you kind of how you tour. And I think now we need volume. Let's see. It is going to be quiet.
Horror Jaconi Homoni Nika time to Maforena watch Kimbia January month Halikaran January Waitana to Hichi Makoyani ka time Wayika Hotivichero watch Kihana Kotoatabo Kedamato Washikana Halikana Kishata Bano Bachalocono Kotufa Ibero Nalikinebe Nakitambia Bahanji Hichikoya Yarahafa Halika Kebenasabo Menana Tomorodoha Ayon Sabo March Monchi to Sabo Tomara Ayon Wabo to Tokoya Baja Wadekwa ta Wiwalako Ayon Modombo Kata Waita Fore Fauchkina Kanaka time Ayon Faji Ayon Bajawa Wana Adashiji Kato Farefana Kadamato Wakilino Locono Yaka Hotivichero Ali Titabo Ali Tina Shatum and Yaho Loquare Namarichisha Nawada Tivichero Yakan Tivichero Kasakoda Kedamatato Adakana Ayomanato Violoco.
This is the Ford and this is the Hunter that come afterwards, but we're not going to get there.
Hichi Inabo Adakana Kedamato Hichikoya Water Babano kijama tukuna Locono ari narakona. Kedama to halikano ba kurki baja aitana kijinki Locono ari nini. Hichikoya hichi to kuchibio fito halikano aitana.
I'm going to stop it here because I just want to wrap it up quickly. Here. Yeah, so this is for us linguists. I think it's really great to use Stellarium because we can finally get over this textual bias and our own problems with not knowing anything about astronomy, and really and contribute at the same time very interesting stuff to Stellarium. I think for Stellarium there are also a lot of benefits here. One thing to think about is that in today's world, language documenters are one of the very few scientists that actually do work with indigenous communities and their languages. Anthropology, there's great exceptions here, but in anthropology has generally moved away from fieldwork a lot. So if we want more indigenous cultures in Stellarium, this is a great audience to speak to. And I know they're very interested in these kind of solutions. I think this one is brilliant, both because of its features for documenting and for sharing the knowledge later. But for this to happen, I think Stellarium also has to offer us something. And one of those main things is really sound, which I'm really happy that we already have options in Stellarium that we can do justice to the oral nature of those languages with a software like this. And I'm only excited about more options in the future. So yeah, I think this is, I'll stop here. I have a lot of comments about what I think could be improved or changed, but I think tomorrow is the day for the constructive criticism. Today, I just wanted to show you what we're playing with. It's all work in progress. We did the translation of the titles we literally did yesterday. So this is all new, but I think there's lots to expect in the future. Thank you.